If you are a founder who has never been ghosted after a round of flattering words, you are probably as mystical and rare as unicorn. Most founders don't want sugar-coated and meaningless compliments. They want blunt honesty and tough questions. Yet too often they are handed empty compliments or vague promises. After all, who wants to offend tomorrow's billionaires? The truth is, real feedback does not break founders. It forges them. It is the fuel that helps them grow, sharpen their ideas, and ultimately thrive. And this is exactly why EthAum created Rose Sessions. No filters, no fluff, just raw, unvarnished feedback from seasoned experts. Think Shark Tank, but stripped of theatrics and packed with insights. Today, Chrissa, founder of Patientory, steps into the spotlight. She's here to pitch the solution, tackle some tough questions, and hear what a diverse panel really thinks about the overall go-to-market strategy, channel strategy, product roadmap of Patientory. Now let's get started with introduction of our esteemed panelist. I'm seeing Pascal on the screen. So Pascal, may I request you to do a quick intro, please?
Hi, Pascal Hoffmann. I lead a team conducting product strategy, innovation, and partnership at Blue Shell of California.
Thank you.
Thanks I live in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Pascal. Your insurance experience is going to add a lot of value to this conversation today. Thanks a lot for joining. May I request Angela to go next, please?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name's Angela Brady. I've been in the drug development industry for over 25 years. Spent my career predominantly at the intersection of clinical research operations, regulatory affairs, and project management, working across biotech, biopharma, CROs, and regulatory systems. Very happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Angela. Patientory is definitely working with quite a few drug discovery companies, so your experience from that perspective is also going to add a lot of value. Appreciate your time today. May I request Osama to go next, please? Osama.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. So my name is Osama. I'm a software engineer by training, carrying more than 20 years of experience in digital health. I work for Dubai Health Authority as a specialist in health informatics, where I lead so many projects, especially on interoperability and health data exchange. Also the chair of ZIMAM, which is a non-for-profit that focuses on empowering digital health talents across MENA region.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Osama. Your experience from digital health, AI, technology, and GCC is going to create a lot of value for this conversation today. Appreciate your time. Ashley, could you please go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the invite. Chrissa, it's lovely to meet you. I'm a fractional healthcare marketer. I've been in healthcare marketing for the last 16 years. I always share with folks, I'm in healthcare because I live it. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at an early age, and I've had the opportunity to work with quite a few companies building models and scaling models to help folks with chronic conditions. So I've worked with quite a few fast growth companies, Livongo, Teladoc, Clearly, also Verily, to help them build and scale new digital health solutions. So really excited to connect and learn about what you're doing, and can definitely bring a little bit some of the patient perspective as well as you think through that. So thanks for glad to be here.
Thanks a lot, Ashley. Your perspective on go-to-market strategies on commercialization is going to be extremely helpful today. Thanks a lot. Inessa, could you please do the introduction?
Sure, absolutely. So hi, everyone. My name is Inessa Vilfo. I'm a clinical operations specialist in pharmaceutical industry. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry over 20 years, large pharma, small, medium biotechs, managing CRO, managing vendors, etc.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Inessa. So we have two experts from the pharma industry today, Angela and Inessa. Appreciate your time. Okay, now it's time to turn up the heat, ask some direct, sharp questions to Chrissa. But before that, let's do a quick intro of Chrissa. Chrissa, your introduction, and then let's get into the presentation, please. Chrissa.
Yes, I should go. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for the presentation.
You can also do a quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Chrissa McFarlane, founder and CEO of Patientory. My expertise has been on pretty much emergent tech and health IT. I started out consultant, integrating Epic across various health systems in the US, went and helped build a telemedicine company that exited in 2019, which after experience in both professional, personal, having my dad misdiagnosed with a chronic illness, decided to start Patientory in empowering individuals with the control and access to their health data. So I'm happy to get started, Pankaj.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, and great to see, familiar faces, Pascal, Osama, and great to meet you, Anessa, Ashley, and Angela. So good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I want to thank EthAum for creating a little different than the typical startup pitch. Most founders spend their time trying to avoid the hard questions, but today I get to invite them. Because healthcare doesn't need another polished pitch, it needs, better answers. So I'll start with our vision. Healthcare will run on AI and Patientory will power the data layer. That is our thesis. Not that AI is coming, it's already here. The real question is, what data will AI use? Where will that data come from? Who controls access to it? And can organizations actually trust it? Right now, healthcare has a massive infrastructure problem. Every year, fragmented health data contributes to an estimated 200 billion to 300 billion in inefficiencies across the US healthcare system. For insurers, providers, and researchers, that means duplicate testing, medication non-adherence, delayed diagnosis, poor chronic disease management, disconnected systems, incomplete member profiles, and expensive decisions made with incomplete information. The healthcare industry keeps trying to build smarter AI, but AI is only as good as the data underneath it. And that's where Patientory comes in. We've built the enterprise health data infrastructure for the AI era. We unify and activate multi-source healthcare data across the entire patient journey, clinical data, claims data, pharmacy data, wearable devices, remote monitoring systems, labs, social determinants of health, and the list goes on, as well as patient-reported outcomes. Instead of living in separate silos, these data sources are transformed into a longitudinal health record that can be securely accessed, analyzed, and activated. But here's where we believe the future differs from the past, right? The patient will remain in control. As AI increasingly is embedded into healthcare, one of the biggest questions facing the industry is not whether AI can access healthcare data, it's who gets to authorize that access. We believe individuals should have visibility and control over how their information is used, and Patientory enables consent-based access to health information through a secure identity and governance framework. Patients can authorize access, organizations can request access, and AI systems can operate on permission data rather than uncontrolled data. This creates something healthcare really needs, which is trust. So let's talk about why this matters for insurance, for example. Insurers are drowning in fragmented information. Imagine trying to understand a member's risk profile using only claims data. You miss lifestyle behavior, wearable activity, medication adherence, social and behavioral signals, and early intervention opportunity. And this is where Patientory can change that. By aggregating multi-health source data into a unified profile, insurers can identify risk sooner, intervene earlier, and engage members before costly events occur. So for instance, a diabetic member's decline activity levels, medication non-compliance, emergency obesity-related risk, and behavioral indicators linked to future utilization. These signals all exist today, and they all exist across current companies, but they're simply disconnected. The results that we see with creating an integrated system is better risk stratification, better member engagement, better quality outcomes, and potentially millions in avoidable healthcare costs. What becomes even more powerful is anonymized data, not individual records, not personally identifiable information, but responsibly governed, anonymized, multi-source data sets. So healthcare AI needs diverse, longitudinal, real-world data, not data from a single provider, a single payer, or a single wearable company. We believe the future belongs to organizations that can responsibly aggregate and govern health intelligence across the entire ecosystem. And Patientory has built the infrastructure that enables that future. We're already demonstrating traction across different markets, especially in health insurance space, such as in the US and South Korea. Through our CARE GLP engagement pilots, we've achieved 22% improvement in medication adherence for GLP-1s. We've 18% reduction in obesity-related risk markers, estimated annual savings of $1,200 to $800 per participant. And in our CARE trials for CROs, we've had 30% faster patient data aggregation, reduced recruitment friction, and lower operational costs, which are measurable, operational improvements. Now let's talk about the business model. We operate an enterprise SaaS model, and our primary customers are CROs, employers, payers. We generate recurring revenue through enterprise contracts that are billed annually. The beauty of infrastructure businesses is that every new integration increases that platform value. So as individuals start to create and integrate more data into the system, it strengthens the ecosystem. And why us? I've spent more than a decade working at the intersection of healthcare, blockchain, interoperability, and patient engagement. And our team as well has worked in Fortune 100 companies, managing large enterprise scale integration, as well as benefits and employee health and wellness. We were founded long before AI became the dominant healthcare narrative, and we recognized early that healthcare's biggest challenge wasn't intelligence, it's access to trusted data. Today, we're operating across the United States and internationally, including South Korea, and we're advancing insurer pilots and market expansion initiatives. We're supported by advisors, all leaders in their respective industries, global ambassadors who represent innovation in their respective countries, as well as healthcare leaders, investors who believe the future of healthcare requires better infrastructure. We're driving significant growth across achieving our annual bottom line revenue goals to be a unicorn company. So I'll leave you all with this. Everyone is asking, what will AI do for healthcare? We think the more important question is, what data will healthcare AI run on? Because healthcare will run on AI, we'll power the infrastructure layer. The problem isn't storing data. We have electronic medical records and systems that do that. It's coordinating consent, identity, governance, and longitudinal access across organizations that don't share systems, incentives, or ownership. The infrastructure layer that enables patient authorized access across all of those stakeholders is the opportunity. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Chrissa, for this quick presentation. Now I will invite panelists to ask some difficult questions to Chrissa. Panelists, please feel free to unmute yourself and start with questions. Ashley? Or Ines, I think you unmuted yourself.
So during the presentation, you mentioned a number of different buyers or users, from a CRO to all the way to payers or whatnot. Is there a predominant one? It feels like there's a lack of focus.
Good question. So our go-to-market, our pretty much product market fit was with a CRO. We were the second largest CRO in pharma. So you saw that slide where we actually helped Moderna get to their phase 3 in their COVID-19 vaccine trial. I can go back to that. So we helped them get that. We recruited over 5,000 patients across 20 different trials. Get into that next stage and level in our growth, it was challenging going to a direct-to-consumer route. We then saw interest from the insurer. So Blue Cross Blue Shield Massachusetts reached out to us. They invested in us and saw that it would help them with a lot of the issues they had when GLP-1s came out in terms of cost, efficiency, and actually getting people to stay on it and not gain the weight after. So with that, we pivoted to addressing this for health payers to also grow our user base in a much cost-effective way. So our target, while we do have that contract with the CRO to support, they have over 10 million in clinical trial recruitment opportunities, we do see it as a necessity to grow the user base for the platform as well.
Understood. So that is all retrospective. Where are you guys going forward? What's your target audience?
Payers, health payers that you see here.
Osama, I think you have a question. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, I have a question. Have you thought about engaging health information exchange organization? They are really a good source of clinical data, which is really required by your target audience, whether like insurance or CRO.
Yeah, so we didn't see it as a necessity because we have integrations already, at least in the US. If you're talking about HIEs in the US, we're already integrated into Care Quality and eHealth Exchange, which allows us to be a national health HIE in itself. So we do consider our platform where users retrieve their data as an HIE because we have those integrations today. So how it works from a user flow is they would download the application, we verify their identity, and from that, our APIs can go out and find their data that exists in an electronic medical record today. And then they can also integrate their wearable devices.
How is that any different than a company like Zeus Health, that already integrates data and kind of provides that unified patient profiles?
Yeah, similar to like a Zeus, we focus more on how the data is accessed and stored. So in the pitch, I mentioned, keeping the data anonymized into data sets, which then it has the opportunity to do more research and create digital twins for that. And then the ability to monetize that data. So we are built on a blockchain-based infrastructure database. So the incentives that we give our users, which I didn't really go deep into, is the ability to monetize their data and to essentially be rewarded for meeting health goals that is provided by the different AI systems.
So I have a question. As someone living with diabetes, I'm inundated, right, with a lot of solutions like this, right? Which ones am I going to consider? Your tech is awesome, right? Obviously, you've got sophisticated, technology that you can offer, different use cases. But talk to me about how many active users do you have on your platform, right? And I would be interested to kind of better understand, like 90-day, what does the active usage look like, just so I can get a better sense of traction.
Yeah, so for the traction that we've had, we have over 10,000 registered on the platform today. So we're pretty much going from pilot to commercialization. In terms of, we currently track 90-day, 30 and 90-day usage based on whether they open a recommendation alert that pops up on their phone, and whether or not they have integrated wearables such as an Apple Watch or Fitbit that gets updated within that monthly basis.
So
How long has... Go ahead.
Sorry, I think what Ashley is trying to understand is what is that data for 90 days users, active users? How many users?
What is the
data, number of users that are active in that 90-day window?
Yeah, so from the 10,000 registered, we about 75%. So those, what I mentioned were, those are how we identify whether or not a user is active.
Thank you.
Follow-up question. I'm assuming that you experience some churn. What type of churns are you experiencing, and what's the main reason why people may abandon your platform?
Yeah, so from the pilots that we've done, the number one reason is, okay, they're no longer on the GLP-1, right? So they're not tracking, whether or not they're taking their medication anymore, or they've simply left Care Validate and it's no longer a paid system for them. So that's part of the churn. Another churn is essentially from what we've seen, either they don't respond to the messages. That is because they're not on a GLP-1. So let's say, they're a much healthier cohort that uses it. They're pretty much using it to aggregate their data and have it there. But they don't really see the need to open it on a daily basis, right? And meeting those health goals. So their health score, in a sense, goes up, doesn't go up much from that standpoint.
Thank
Can I
you.
dig into that a little bit more? So
Yeah.
on your website, I was looking into your kind of the patients that you're targeting, right? And these are folks who are lower socioeconomic folks, right? So if I put myself in that lens, this I would imagine is creating additional work for patients, and you would also need to assume that the patient demand for this is there. Talk to me about your population a little bit more, right? I mean, I think you're probably learning every day, right? And having to incorporate feedback to fine tune this for patients. But I guess my question is, what additional work is this creating for patients? And what has the reception been? Because I think churn, to Pascal's point, churn's important. Is your focus still on the patients from the, lower socioeconomic, or are you widening your base a bit?
Yeah, so that has been our current focus because of the initiatives around, especially like CMS and Medicare. And, being on a committee, part of it was, okay, Wi-Fi and mobile access. So those are like challenges in that cohort population. But when that's, pretty much solved, it's understanding, what are the right dollar incentives, right, to keep them engaged on the platform that we are testing and working out.
So staying on the sort of the patient view of the app, as a patient, I'm not generally inclined to voluntarily share my information with an insurer or with a payer. So how typical is that kind of reaction from the patients that you're working with, those 10,000, say, that are currently signed up?
Yeah, and this goes back to, I think it was the question that it was either Ashley or Nessa asked about how is it different from, like another competitor in the space. It goes back to the fact that it keeps the data anonymized. So it's like you do have the markers that this person is in the plan, but it's cohort data, right? So from a payer standpoint, it's like you have access to more of that daily lifestyle information from the user, but it's not personalized or essentially, PII, where it's like, I know who this individual is directly.
Okay, that helps. And, thinking about the comment that was made around, the 25% of patients that tend to churn away from the app, and they're no longer on their GLP-1 medication, or there's no longer a real reason for them to look at the information daily. Are you doing anything around general wellness, like hours of sleep or stress metrics, anything like that, that the app can also use to advise patients to keep them engaged?
Yeah, so we integrate on a wearables dependent on what is available by the wearable. So that is in our product roadmap to integrate more on, what are you eating on a daily basis? I think Google just launched a new photo feature where you can take a picture of your meal and the AI pretty much can calculate the calorie and the macros from that meal. So we are looking at and assessing and doing R&D on how we can, look at the wearables we already integrate with, from that 500 that can better provide more motivation, right, for a user to integrate into that Patientory health score that would get them to engage further.
Mm-hmm.
What is proprietary about what you guys are doing versus what's available, what other companies are doing? To give you an example, there's a company called League that has invested about $500 million into a platform that essentially ingests all sorts of information, from EMR, from wearables, from, all sorts of sources, aggregates it, and then spins it out in a nice to follow as a next best step actions and things like that. So what do you guys own what is your IP?
Yeah, so we have about 15 patents. It's pretty much on the decentralized infrastructure and storage of the information and the ability to use a tokenized system to then generate a quantifiable data asset and create a monetary value for that information. So our patents span around that, how to access the data from a decentralized system where the patient remains anonymized, right? And how we're able to, essentially use their ID verification to make pointers to the data across the multi-source system. So in a sense, our patent is around a marketplace model from the data, which then becomes a digital asset.
Got it. What is stopping you? I mean, how long you guys been in existence as an organization, first of all?
So in existence, 10 years, we've raised pretty much over $10 million, which has built out the national technology infrastructure in the US, which is owned and held in an association model. So again, that's another big difference from our competitor, looking at who really controls and owns the data. In that model, it is governed and controlled by the individual and not a third-party company from that standpoint. So that we get into more of like the legal view of where is the data stored, who owns ownership of it, and who governs that information. Which we, curate more to that individual user to make them understand, okay, you're providing access to it, based on who requests that information. And and it's not like your data is going to, be perpetually stored in someone's cloud infrastructure. Our application, our go-to-market app for the consumer and enterprise, has been in market for 2.5 years post R&D and actually building out the entire infrastructure. And this is feedback from the pilots that you see here, which sprung out of GSK's innovator, their pretty much innovation arm that we worked alongside with. They're able to help during COVID, and most recently working with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts.
What do you think is stopping you from being further along than you are? Because this organization seems like it's been 10 years in existence, 2.5 of them been on a market, which is basically 7 some odd years in planning, $10 million raised. What do you think is preventing you from moving forward much more aggressively?
Yeah, I think for now we're focusing on larger partners that can help us scale faster. It's either we raise, $1 billion or, we kind of find the right partners to help us scale. So that's what we've been doing, the past 90 days, especially now, before, looking at, how we've created Ambassador Network globally, there wasn't, AI wasn't readily adopted in healthcare. We do see this now, as 2026 as a turn in the market, where it's much more easier to have these conversations, especially go into health insurer organizations and employers, where before, that wasn't a priority. So, looking at larger partners, that can help us get integrated faster, as well as scale and, raising significant amounts of funding.
What kind of feedback are you getting from those larger partners so far?
So we've actually signed a partnership with partners like that we're considering, because we are cloud agnostic, as Google Cloud. So we have signed them on as well, and they've invested for us to build and go to their marketplace, as well as AWS, who we see more of a positive traction, because more than 60% of customers are using an AWS cloud instance. And they've also invested in getting us integrated into their system and go into marketplace. So that is a work in progress, and then we hope to work with their partners to, focus on their healthcare vertical solutions. We also signed a partnership with Oracle Cloud. So I think, the appetite is there. These are all press releases that we have with Oracle Google Cloud, and we're going to be releasing one with AWS soon.
I think Osama has a question. Osama, please go ahead. You have been raising your hand. You're on mute. Please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, please
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes. So actually, I have two questions. The first question, I believe that to become successful in this space, you need to have, in the first place, kind of a maximal data model that can collect all the data and put them in a meaningful format that can be acceptable by all stakeholders. So I give you one example for that. If you are wearing a Fitbit, for example, that sends millions of data points, some of them will be noisy, some of them will be incorrect. So having some sort of a way to convert all these data points to meaningful patterns that can be understood in the clinical context, that could be the real challenge that need to be solved. And the same for other data sources that coming from EMRs or whatever. And I believe also you need to add to this also the data collected by patients, like PROMs and PREMs, and collecting them at certain point of time. Like, for example, before visit, after visit, or after an accident. There'll be a lot of these kind of processes that if you manage to do it on yourself, you will have a very unique kind of data sets. So, and once you have this data model with all these pieces together, you need also to have kind of a converter that they can convert those data models to the models that are actually consumed by CROs, like, for example, OMOP or FIRE or whatever. So what's your plan for building this maximal clinical data model?
To reiterate, just so I understand, Osama, so your recommendation is to have a maximal data set model that can retrieve data, from what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Across,
and put them in the context. Yeah, and put them in the right context. Yeah.
And put them in the right context. Context of, can you be more specific with that, please?
So I can give you one example for that. So looking for example, the blood pressure. So blood pressure is just 2 digits that everybody knows, but there's sometimes there'll be context around the position of the patient, whether they are sitting or they're walking or they're on stress, what kind of equipment that you are using to collect this data, whether this is a cuff or this is a ring or whatever. So, and everyone has his own trust model, for example. So building all these kind of context around the data will make it more meaningful for decision making.
I see. Yes, agreed. So today, in practice, we have markers that identify where the data source came from. Whether it was from a medical device or whether it was from like an Apple Health. So the data that shows up on the patient's dashboard, or the enterprise system tags essentially the source of the information, right? So I think, from our ambassadors, what we're currently creating now is more certification of essentially what the quality, right, and the tiers of information and how essentially they will be used in clinical settings and non-clinical settings, right? Because you have some wearables where the blood pressure is not as accurate than an FDA-approved medical device. And I think that's, the interesting part and the challenge around also integrated with health AI is determining the quality of the source of the information. So for our platform being able to do that, right, when we talk to our clinical counterparts, right, it's creating that trust to know that they can identify the source of the information and whether or not they want to include that in a diagnosis or a recommendation for the user.
Chrissa, you mentioned that you're targeting payers. I'm curious to know, what is your timing between the time at which a contract would be signed and your solution would be operational in the hands of users?
So based on our past experience working with the Blue team, much longer, because they were also a strategic investor, I think it took much faster, but we were able to get a decision in within like 6 to 7 months, which may be faster than Pascal, than what you're used to working with companies. I don't know if it's shorter. Would love to get your feedback and experience on that as well.
Okay. So you had mentioned, Chrissa, that you see a way to position Patientory to match patients to clinical trials. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So when we developed the health information exchange platform, and essentially got success in integrating across the different EMR systems through federal initiatives, through Care Equality, which exists today in the US, which most of what the patient aggregators use. We were contacted by a CRO, which was essentially bought by, now it's Informa, to assist with particularly Moderna and other pharma companies for COVID. So with that, we were able to query the data. We used intelligence to also map where they were missing in terms of like underserved populations in order to get that FDA phase 3 approval. So from that, we identified, areas within the US to target patients. So we did it more of a chicken and the egg scenario. We had the data, we know where they were by zip code, et cetera. And we went out to the different hospital systems and partnered with them to get people to sign up, right? We didn't have anyone on the platform then, but then prior to that, we were successfully, just identifying people for that trial. So based on the criteria that was laid out by the pharma company, we built that into an LLM, which then queried the entire database, so 290 million data points that exist today in the system across the EMRs to do that. So in an ideal system, in an ideal platform with, let's say, 50 million users, they would already have a Patientory application where we don't necessarily know the personal identifier, but we know their data sets, and we can then send out, reminders and recommendations for them to automatically sign up.
Okay. So that data is not anonymized. You know the patients that you need to target for these clinical trial recommendations. Is that right?
It's anonymized. We know where they exist within the health system, right? We don't necessarily know their names, but we know their medical record number, which is what essentially is shared with an EMR through an EMR API. So we have the clinical data sets and the medical record number that, corresponds to the patient.
So through the medical record number, you're able to outreach directly to the individual patient.
Today, we outreach through the health system that stores the data to contact the individual patient.
Okay, that helps. So you're not sending any kind of leads to sponsors or leads to sites, or is that a future case scenario where you might be able to do that?
That is the future case scenario. So that is the ideal scenario at scale, once we have a mass volume of users on the platform.
Okay. I won't go down this rabbit hole of questioning since you're not there yet, but it would be interesting to kind of understand more about your thinking and how that will work. But we don't have to get into that right now.
Yeah, and it ties back into what I've described of that marketplace model, essentially what we're building. They always say, do you build the market first, or, work your way up to the volume of users.
How many people are currently within your organization?
We currently have 8 people. That's full time.
Okay, so within 8 people, just help me understand, you're trying to target payers, and you're also trying to target potentially, information going through CROs and whatnot. How are you guys going to be able to manage that?
So right now we have channel partnerships. So the CRO, again, our systems take whatever inclusion exclusion criteria to be able to find the patient. We already have a contract with them. Going through payers right now, we have a signed partnership with Marsh McLennan, right? So they are the largest broker and wellness provider for health insurers. And then our goal is to essentially provide the product to the insurance company and scale up as we get on more insurers. So we use channel partnerships, direct partnerships, instead of going at it alone. And we do use system integrators as well.
So I have a question from a marketing perspective. I work with a lot of companies where I show up to their website and they do a lot of things, right? So you're with us, right? If you have to describe Patientory in literally one sentence, that's my first question. And then I have a second question after that. But I just want to make sure, how are you clearly defining and positioning this? Because I do worry that you're trying to be all things. But I think to Nessa's point, right, it's hard to be all things to everyone. So just curious how you answer that question.
Yeah, so Patientory is a health wallet that allows individuals to not only securely access their data, but to use that data to help them better improve their health outcomes, which we see is important for payers, which we focus on. And we already have a relationship with identifying, them for clinical trials.
Okay. And then my second question would be, again, from a patient lens. I mean, I'm using a CGM, a pump, a Fitbit, right? I am tracking so much data. And I can tell you, I've worked with so many of these companies where really defining the experience is so important. When I look at your website, I see a very transactional experience. I'm curious, like, who's doing your marketing, and have you considered leaning into more of the actual end users who are using this? Because I do feel that you're missing that story. This is very transactional. And if you were trying to convince me, I would say, I'm not sure. I'm not convinced yet, because I want to hear from other people like me. So talk to me about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so we actually have I literally just got a mock-up 3 days ago for a new website. We haven't redone our website in like 4.5 years. And that's specific because we're constantly getting feedback, understanding, and didn't want to make a big brand change or just change without, taking that feedback into consideration and making it more, amenable, like you said, to the end user. We've put a lot of emphasis in finding our end users in like our social media today. So across like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, we have users that use it, and they, send their testimonials. So that's been like our focus on how to bring in and really understand what the user's needs are. From that perspective, and as well as the videos and just the feedback from those real users on social media.
Great.
You talked
Chrissa, you
about
mentioned that you have 8 FTE. What's your current revenue and what's your projection a year down the road?
Yes. So again, I mentioned most all of our revenue today, except for the CRO contracts, the clinical trial recruitment, have been pilots with health insurers, payers, which is roughly a little $500,000, right? So we still are a seed startup. Our projection, get into the contracts that we've signed this quarter and earlier this year, we're looking at a little over $1 million, which, is our thesis to get to that Series A strategic growth raise, with our next round of raise. So once we've gotten peer-reviewed, published research on this, that it improves outcomes because patients are motivated, they control access, they have all that data. We've done white papers. We've been published in journals as well. So we know that the system works. And now the next phase is to scale it, which is part of that identification, that we've been doing, who is that best partner to take a seed company to that next phase of growth, which we believe we found in one of the cloud companies that we've signed on with.
Thank you.
I'm having a hard time with the leap from, yes, patients aggregate their data, they have their data, to patients improving health outcomes. How are two related, right? There's no clinical people that are involved here, right? There's no doctors, there's no nurses. Help me understand this leap between just having data versus outcomes.
Yeah. So earlier on, what I mentioned, part of the outcomes in, a lot of the outcomes that we focus on as a patient engagement company is essentially, engagement that we've talked to insurers around. Patients might get sent home with a care plan, but that doesn't mean they follow up with the care plan, right? There is a gap there. So this is pretty much how we're utilizing technology to solve those gaps in care that can be prevented, especially when we look at chronic diseases. So from our standpoint, the Patientory platform and what I mentioned, the ability to monetize on the platform, and what sets us apart from other data aggregators and patient portals that just collect the information is what we've built underneath. It's that economic incentive layer where, based on actions, that are done on the platform, we're constantly, rewarding that individual, and it accumulates over time. So think of it as, okay, you have a credit score, right? You want to improve your credit score because you get to do more things. The same concept when we think about Patientory, at the end of every 90 days, the individual receives a monetary reward based on how many points they were able to improve their health score, based on the recommendations that they get on a daily basis, that is generated from their health data, right? And that can include taking their GLP-1 medications a day. So they can anticipate that there would be some sort of reward at the end of that by completing these daily actions, and which corresponds to improving their health.
I think Angela had a question. Angela, please.
I did. Thank you. And that does lead into the question that I had, or at least it ties into it. When a Patientory member provides consent for their data to be shared with a payer, but then they revoke that consent, how is that applied downstream? So how is that information pulled out of the data that's already been shared? It might have already been monetized or tokenized in some way. How does that apply? The data may have been analyzed. It might have been written to an audit trail. So how do those actions impact the revocation of consent from a patient?
Yeah, and it goes back to this. I know, Angela, it's like a different question and dressed up differently. And it boils down to our tech and the infrastructure, right? So the ability that when a person gives access to this insurer, they're not giving them their PII, they're giving them their data set, right? So then that becomes revoked, and the metadata that corresponds to their information is revoked. So the way Patientory works is, I don't know if you guys use crypto wallets. That's essentially what we are, a crypto wallet for health information. How it works is you have the data that is stored in some locality. You then create a layer on top of that, which becomes your avatar, right, for doing business. So your avatar is represented by this 26 numeric digit, which you give consent to be used in the marketplace. When you no longer want to have that consent used, it's revoked and your avatar is removed, but they never really have PII that leads back to you. It's just your avatar in a more simplified version.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. Because Chrissa, you are sitting in front of all these experts, from different, experiences, coming from different backgrounds. Is there any specific question or guidance that you want to get out of these panelists? Any burning question, challenge that you are facing in your day-to-day operations that you want to get answered today through this panel, Chrissa?
Yeah. Because our next phase is growth, we are looking to grow alongside the health insurance payers, whether that's a self-insured employer or a health insurance business. And the challenges that comes in scaling, we're at our pilot stage and commercializing with that. So just, good advice for a company that is moving in that direction. We've looked at Livongo competitors, et cetera, but we're coming from it from now people have their data to drive, those outcomes. Yeah, just advice from that perspective. I know what came up was, okay, this may not seem clinical, right? We're more of a tool rather than a service. So we don't see it as the end all be all, but the goal is to better equip, right, the patient and the end user. And you guys are all on different verticals of that healthcare platform. So I would look for any
guidance, any recommendation, any insight for Chrissa, based on what she asked or based on other factors that you have seen so far. Angela, please.
Yeah, I would say for me, you have a very interesting technology that I'm only just now through this discussion with you starting to understand a little bit better. So, that tells me that you know exactly what you're trying to do, but the way that it's being communicated right now feels more fragmented. So my recommendation is to really tighten up that story around where you've been, where you are now, and where you're going. And, just kind of tie that up and put a bow around it. And that will help you to answer questions like the ones that we've been asking much, much easier.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Angela. So storytelling. Okay. Any other recommendation, guidance for Chrissa? Osama, are you trying to unmute yourself?
Yes, yeah. How are you? So I think, as I said, this is a really good application that's really required. But you try to think again. So if I'm a patient with two NCD, maybe one rare disease, how many times I would like to engage with CROs, or that will be kind of few times. But if you look to my story about how I take care of myself, how I'm trying to improve my outcomes, and how I'm going to share my data. And sharing data is not only with insurance or with CROs. You can even this could be sharing your data with your personal trainer or with your uh, employer if you feel not feeling well. So there will be many types of data sharing that can happen, and I believe that utilizing your tool to smoothen these kind of processes and also tighten your story around measuring outcomes as you go. These two parts are really a gap in the market, and I believe that if you focus on them, you will win it.
Thank you. I think Inessa needs to leave. Inessa, any last comment before you leave? Sorry.
No, I mean, I think it's a great technology. I would just say focus, 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 right? To Angela's point, it took me also quite a while to understand, wrap my head around what do you guys do, right? So again, storytelling, making sure that it's super clear what you are, your wallet, you're selling, just making it super clear. But also when you're approaching payers, like focus on payers or focus on one thing, right? Not so many different avenues that are, CRO and this and that, just kind of one avenue and just go at it and just be very aggressive with that.
Thank you, Inessa. Ashley, please.
Yeah, I'm the marketer here and the patient, right? So I agree with the storytelling angle. I think also don't forget, invest in your end users, right? So invest in building affinity. You said that you're going out identifying, patients and users that can be part of your storytelling effort. It's important, right? So keep doing that. It's a great way to drive growth organically because that'll be important. So as you're building your marketing strategy, don't forget about incorporating the actual end users who are using this, integrate them into the fabric of your narrative, because that is really when I was at Livongo, that's exactly what we did. You can tell a story in a lot of different ways. There's the economic, there's the financial, but then there's the impact, right, that you're having on an end user. That's where the magic happens. So
fantastic. Pascal, any last comment, any last guidance from your side, please?
Yeah, when you target payers, Chrissa, you alluded to the distinction between fully insured clients and self-funded. I would recommend that you focus on self-funded and ideally find a self-funded employer and triangulate that with the payer. Traditionally, that's where the innovation is coming from self-funded, and then it's applied to fully insured. I think you'll get more traction on the self-funded side.
Fantastic. Okay. So we heard from the jury, from the panel, focus, and storytelling. I think these two have been the main key takeaways from the panel. And obviously, Chrissa, you and I will go through this conversation again to really see what are the areas where we can improve, how we can improve, what are the strategies that we can, implement to enable the real efficient growth from here. But I really want to thank all the panelists for their time today, for amazing insights. You poured your decades of experience into this conversation by listening to Chrissa's pitch and while providing her feedback. Chrissa, I think what you have done today is fabulous. You invited all the criticism, all the feedback on such a platform, which is going to be live streamed in a couple of days. And it's not easy. It requires guts. It requires confidence in yourself, what you're building, what you're doing, and in your own story. So I think it's very inspiring, and I hope that this session can help you grow in even a more efficient manner. So thanks a lot, all the panelists, for your guidance today, for your time today, and let's reconnect soon to see how we can collaborate, find opportunities for each other, and probably help each other.